That time I got reincarnated as a demon lord. English, by LordedoMal44. 44 The ogre village battle P3 an attack, followed in another, which was followed by another. Without stopping, Akami kept advancing, not only towards the ogre, she attacked the father and daughter with all the strength she had. No matter how hard she was hit, Akami kept counter-attacking with all her strength and showing no fear. Using the sword in his right hand, Akami attacked, aiming for the ogre's neck. She didn't have the strength to decapitate him, but if she hit a vital spot the ogre would be more than unable to continue. Of course, she seemed to have forgotten that she shouldn't kill the ogres unless absolutely necessary, but as long as he wasn't dead the complete healing potion could do the trick. When the ogre used one of his hands to hit his sword, deflecting the direction the blade was heading, Akami used the sword in his other hand to attack him and she released the first sword. The ogre was forced to defend himself. Again, and before he could even think about attacking, in Akami's right hand, a spear appeared. The ogre had no option but to retreat, avoiding being hit by the spear, which he had no way to defend. As for the ogre's daughter, the sword that Akami released was kicked away, towards her, and she was forced to use her club to defend. Until now, Akami had kept up the fight against both father and daughter using this strategy. No matter how much her father defended himself, Akami would drop her weapons and create new ones so she could keep attacking. Meanwhile, she would kick her fallen weapons, attacking her daughter and preventing her from approaching. Of course, if the daughter tried to attack, Akami would parry her attacks, and use the dropped weapons to prevent her father from approaching. That way, she would always keep one of them busy and have the fight in a constant 1v1. A simple but effective strategy. In fact, if that had happened from the start of the battle, and along with a good element of surprise, Akami would have had a good chance of winning, even against an absurdly superior opponent. Even so, Akami positioned herself to attack once more, dropping her now useless spear and preparing to slash at the ogre in front of her with a short sword. Still, when she tried to create the sword, Akami felt her vision become a blur, and nothing materialized in her hand. Akami was out of magic, she was at her limit. Maybe the ogre noticed that, maybe he just took advantage of the gap that formed at that moment when Akami was surprised, but he attacked, launching several attacks against Akami's body. At the same time, Akami felt his energy drain even more when his multi-layer barrier was hit by multiple attacks. Her body was on edge from all the damage from the blows she had received, and her mind was on the verge of collapsing from the expenditure of spells. Despite that, take that! Using the sword in her left hand, Akami forced the ogre back before he could launch another series of attacks, and then she leapt, catching the spear she had thrown away in her right hand again. Fortunately, even though she couldn't create more weapons with her skill, the battlefield was still full of the weapons she had created. Akami wasn't afraid of her opponent anymore. Give up, Akami. You have no real chance of winning this fight. You're at your limit. The ogre said this and charged forward, roaring with excitement. Akami was not far behind. Even weakened, her will to win this battle did not weaken, and using the weapons she had she would attack her enemy until he fell. Before she could hit, however, a club hit her from the side of her vision, throwing Akami's body away. You've been attacking non-stop and now you're distracted? Don't forget, I'm here too. Akami stood up, feeling how her multi-layer barrier had just come down from that attack. Her armor would now completely absorb the impact of the attack, distorting the metal, and whatever passed through would affect her already weakened body. The fight was over. Akami didn't have the necessary power to keep fighting. And still, it's over, Akami. You fought well, and against 2 ogres, no less, but it's over. The ogre started walking towards Akami, wrapping his fists in his aura. Akami didn't have the necessary strength to defend against her attacks this time. Akami didn't even have the necessary strength to stand up properly, and she felt that even her armor, and the weapons it created, were on the verge of disappearing. Even so, even with her armor slowly disappearing, Akami still smiled at the ogre approaching her. Why that smile, Akami? Do you have another miracle skill that will save you? Hoo. No, I don't. Akami just smiled wider, barely containing her laughter, as she saw the ogre position himself in front of her to knock her out. Something inside her just warned her that it was all right, that she didn't have to worry about anything, that she would be safe. What I have is a really amazing boyfriend. The ogre didn't seem to understand, but he didn't care. Positioning himself correctly, he threw a punch towards Akami. strong enough to knock her down without killing her, but weak enough so that she wouldn't end up dead due to weakness. After he defeated the leader of the goblins, that Rimuru, he planned to take her to the ogre village so that the priestesses could heal her. He had seen value in her. Maybe she could be trained. With that in mind, the ogre attacked again. His punch was traveling at really deadly speed and... Would you mind taking your sane hands off my girlfriend? The ogre's punch stopped suddenly. No, the ogre's punch was stopped by a hand. In front of the ogre, a goblin. No, a goblin-sized hobgoblin, was holding his hand like it was nothing. This goblin was dressed in what appeared to be bronze-colored armor, fully fitted around every part of his body except for his head and face, and he had a silver sword in his right hand. Seeing the expression on the newly arrived goblin's face, the ogre knew immediately that he was in a bad situation and tried to retreat, but it was impossible. The grip on his hand was strong enough to stop him from moving. And then the ogre saw that the goblin was swinging his sword, trying to cut him. Using his free hand, with as much aura as the ogre could muster, he slammed the goblin's sword head on, throwing it away, and then he used his foot to kick the goblin away. Even so, in the face of the tough armor, all the ogre managed to do was throw himself away from the goblin, avoiding the extremely powerful grip of his hand. The ogre looked at the goblin in front of him with an expression of terror, not knowing how such a powerful creature could still be considered a goblin. He had the same aura that the ogre expected from another ogre, or even superior to that, an aura coming from a spirit. What are you? No, who are you? Are you the Rimuru they serve? There was fear in the ogre's voice. He was frightened by the idea that this was the one leading the goblins, no doubt a Majin too powerful to be underestimated. Although he alone wasn't enough to take down the entire ogre village, the goblin in front of them was more than powerful enough to defeat most of the ogres individually. He couldn't defeat him himself, and figured only 4 ogres could. Only his wife, the head of the ogres, the sage and the priestess could defeat a goblin that emanated this kind of aura. When the goblin started to move, the ogre kept his eyes on him, not wanting to miss the slightest sign of any of its movements. Despite that, he didn't attack. He didn't even seem to have noticed he was there. All the goblin did was turn towards Akami, who was still lying behind him. Are you okay, love? Not badly hurt? I'm fine. No, I'm more or less. I broke a few bones, but a healing potion and I'll be better soon. Akami spoke, smiling, with no sign of the wild woman that could be seen just a few minutes ago. Instead, all the ogre saw there was a young girl in love, like any other. Of course, he himself wasn't impressed. After all, his wife was no different and he still didn't understand what she saw in him. All he could say was that love was a crazy thing, even more so within his family. Very well. I have a potion here with me, but since you're tired, go rest in the back, Sue. I'll take care of the situation here, Sue. The ogre watched as the goblin gave Akami something she drank, and then, miraculously, her wounds, which should have been serious, closed in the blink of an eye. He almost got a look of terror as he imagined what it would be like if every enemy soldier did that, healing from every wound as if it were nothing, but he calmed down afterwards. He took down many goblin soldiers and none of them had anything like this before. Furthermore, these two were most certainly not common. Furthermore, although it healed the wounds, what he gave her, this healing potion, did not restore her lost spells. As such, enemy soldiers had a limited amount of power, and they could be taken down if they fought too many ogres. As the ogre finished convincing himself that the ogres still had a favorable chance of victory, he watched as Akami walked away, and as the goblin watched her go. The direction she went was the same one she had been protecting until now, the direction where Rimuru, the leader of the enemy, was, and the direction where most of the enemy troops were standing without advancing. And then, when she was gone. Very well, now, let me deal with the bastard who attacked my girlfriend Sue. The ogre felt how the pressure emitted by the goblin in front of him increased more, as if he were an animal threatening a creature he saw as a threat. Dad. Take it. Hearing his daughter's words, the ogre looked to the side, only to see his own hammer flying towards him. Without hesitation he picked up the hammer, getting into a fighting stance with his weapon as he watched his daughter do the same without letting go of her club. He made a questioning expression at her, wondering why she was so on her guard, but she smiled at him in return. You let your guard down with that goblin and you got hurt. You're hurt now, Mom will definitely kill you for that. So let's fight together now, without letting our guard down. Humph. Looks like I taught you pretty well, young lady. Smiling at his daughter, the ogre readied himself. The enemy in front of him was no ordinary one, he was sure of that, but he and his daughter would manage. Still, if this wasn't Rimuru, and he felt that this wasn't him, then it was certain that this Rimuru guy was good at gathering powerful individuals. Maybe. Just maybe. Serving someone so strong isn't such a bad thing. With that thought in mind, the ogre prepared to advance. He wouldn't let his guard down this time, nor would he hold back in his blows. This time, he and his daughter would step forward, with everything they had, and bring down this enemy by fighting together. At least, that was the plan. The chief of the ogres watched the battlefield from afar, undecided about the results. If a person looked at it from an individual point of view, then both sides were even as far as this battle was concerned. The enemy soldiers, split into pairs, were keeping their soldiers contained, and they neutralized each other in equal proportions. Among common soldiers, it could be considered as a draw. Even so, the head of the ogres didn't feel that this was a draw. The real battle would be taking place between the phenomenal individuals on both sides. This is something the boss knew from the beginning. The strongest on his side would take down dozens of enemy soldiers. The strongest on the enemy side would take down dozens of his soldiers, and in such a moment the result would be seen, when only the phenomenal individuals were left on that battlefield. Still, could he call it a draw? The enemy brought 100 soldiers, but only 50 of them came to the battlefield, of which 20 fell and retreated. Among the phenomenal individuals of the enemy, some, in particular the strange dark-skinned Majin and the goblin archer, had taken down dozens of their soldiers each, and less than 50 soldiers were left on the field. Furthermore, the husband of one of his top generals, one of the most powerful ogres in his army, had stood by fighting a single goblina of phenomenal power, as equals in power. All the pride and superiority the ogres had carried this far had been crushed, and by none other than goblins. Not even the phenomenally powerful mounts they brought with them interfered with the outcome of this fight, only the goblins were fighting and taking down their ogres. And worst of all, Rimuru hadn't moved a single inch since the start of the battle, as if he was saying that his forces couldn't even reach him. Boss. Their fight is over. He defeated the goblin, although he was badly injured in the process. Turning to the side, the chieftain looked at the priestess, who was also his wife, and gave a slight nod. He had felt when the two's aura had ceased, proof that their battle had come to an end, and the goblin was the one with the weakest aura between the two. Yet, unlike his wife, who had honed her skills as a priestess, he had not seen the battlefield with his own eyes. From what she said about the battle, among the things he saw, he could guess that she was the bearer of a unique skill. These individuals were rare and sparse among themselves. After all, it was difficult to acquire even a single unique skill. Even so, it was frightening for him to imagine that the enemy had such a person, and that he wasn't even the enemy leader. If this goblin had a unique skill, then Rimuru, the enemy leader, had one too, if not more than one. To imagine that my husband would have such a hard time taking down a single goblin. Wise, I think I'll have to ask your help to increase his training a bit. Turning towards the ogress who said this, the chief saw one of his generals, one of the strongest ogresses in the entire village. In that village, among all the ogres, probably only the sage and himself, the head of the ogres, were strong enough to defeat her in hand-to-hand combat. Of course, if the subject allowed the use of magic, then his wife, a very powerful priestess, would also have a chance, but when it comes to the physique, few are the ones who would reach a madwoman like her. Honestly, he didn't understand how she, a powerful and experienced ogress, had married the most empty-headed ogre in the entire village. Still, they did, and the child that was born proved to be the perfect match between them. Don't worry about it now, General. Our troops are falling to the enemy, and we don't even know how strong this enemy is yet. It may be that, in a few minutes, we will have to go all out and advance to him, using this group of elite composed of us. The head of the ogres muttered this, seeing the ogres that were in the group. He, the chief and strongest of all the ogres in this village. The sage, the oldest ogre, with 300, having surpassed the natural lifespan of an ogre, and the most experienced swordsman. His wife, the priestess, and the most experienced in magic within the village. The general, the second strongest in combat and the most experienced in dealing with monsters, second only to the sage and his life experience. Furthermore, His 2 children, an experienced warrior and an apprentice priestess, were in the group as well, along with a few other promising ogres, and they were all ready to jump into battle to allow this group of individuals to go to Rimuru and face him, until one side emerged victorious. After all, if they couldn't defeat Rimuru, then no one else could. So that was your plan? I'm sorry to inform you, but this isn't going to work. As soon as he heard these words, the head of the ogres felt terror, as did most of those present. The terror came from 2 main reasons. First, they could hear the voice of the person who spoke to them, but they had not felt his presence until he had arrived at this place, and second, do you really think we're going to let you touch the king? The second reason is that they felt an infernal pressure enveloping them. The woman who had just arrived had more spells than anything they had ever seen, no matter which one it was, with the exception of the storm dragon himself, Veldora. And they still felt like she wasn't even trying. She was a true monster. So, shall we fight?